They always ask the same question: how do I get my wife to want me again? And the truth is harsh. It's not about flowers. It's not about dinner dates. It's not about learning another trick from a magazine. It's about this: the moment you live together, full time, day after day, the desire begins to fade. That's not bitterness talking. That's experience. And if you're honest with yourself, you know it too. Think back. Think to the beginning, the rush of the early days, the excitement when she knocked on your door, the way you cleaned the house, lit the candles, shaved twice in one day just because she was coming over. It mattered, because she wasn't always there. You had space. You had anticipation. And anticipation, gentlemen, is what fuels attraction. Now fast forward, 2 toothbrushes by the sink, her shoes in the hallway, her stuff piled next to yours, and slowly, the mystery fades. The space disappears. The tension that once pulled you together begins to feel like pressure pushing you apart. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening. It was nothing special, just a Tuesday night. She scrolled on her phone. I stared at my plate, and for a second, I realized we weren't partners anymore. We were roommates. And that shift, from lovers to roommates, is where most relationships begin to die. You don't notice it right away. At first it's subtle. She sighs a little more. You snap a little quicker. The bed feels colder even when you're both lying in it. And then one morning, you wake up and wonder, why do I feel more alone next to her than I did when I was single? That's not just loneliness. That's erosion. The slow breaking down of desire that happens when independence is lost. And here's the truth no one tells you. Living together doesn't guarantee closeness. Sometimes, it guarantees distance. I've watched men try everything to fix it. Date nights, therapy, vacations, and still, the same complaints return. I feel trapped. She doesn't respect me. Oh, he stopped leading. She stopped caring. The pattern is predictable, and the statistics back it up. Less than 12% of couples, after 8 years of living together, still describe themselves as truly in love. Not roommates, not business partners, but in love. 12%. That's it. And yet we act shocked when another marriage collapses. When another man says, I don't know what happened. We just grew apart. No, brother, you didn't grow apart. You lost the space that made you grow together. Now listen carefully. I am not saying all cohabitation is doomed, but I am saying this. If you remove every ounce of independence, if you share every square foot, every routine, every moment, then don't be surprised when desire slips quietly out the back door. Because attraction is not built on constant exposure. It's built on distance, on longing, on mystery. And when you live in the same house, day after day, year after year, mystery becomes the first casualty. I've seen couples pretend, smiling in public, posting pictures online, but behind closed doors, they barely speak. They fight over groceries. They argue over bills. They sleep in separate rooms. And still, they call it love. But love without desire is just an arrangement. And an arrangement is not what men like you signed up for. The hardest part is this. When you live together long enough, resentment replaces romance. Every small habit becomes a reason to disconnect. The way she leaves dishes in the sink, the way you forget the laundry, the tone in her voice, the silence in yours. All of it piles up, not into passion, but into disgust. And disgust, my friend, is not just another fight. It's the death sentence of desire. Because once disgust sets in, there's no going back. The countdown has already begun. Now you may ask, so what's the alternative? Are you saying independence is better? I'm saying this. Independence is not the enemy of love. It's the oxygen of it. Think of fire. Too close, and you smother it. Give it space, and it breathes. The same is true for attraction, for connection, for desire. When you keep your independence, you keep the spark alive. When you give it all away, you risk suffocating both of you. And that is why, for so many men over 40, over 50, independence feels better than living together. Not because they hate women, not because they hate love, but because they finally realize this truth. Peace is priceless, and once you've lost it, you'll do anything to protect it again. I used to think moving in together was progress, that it was the natural step. First you date, then you share weekends, then you share bills, and before long, you're sharing everything. That's what they tell us, right? That's the path to commitment, the proof of love, the finish line of romance. But here's what I learned the hard way. Cohabitation can feel less like love and more like a cage, not all at once. At first it feels exciting. New furniture, shared routines, the thrill of waking up next to her every morning. But slowly, almost invisibly, freedom starts to shrink. Your chair isn't just your chair anymore. Your time isn't just your time anymore. Every decision becomes a negotiation, and every negotiation chips away at your peace. You want to watch the game. She wants to watch a show. You want to sleep early. She wants to talk at midnight. You want quiet. She wants conversation. And the more you bend, the more you feel yourself breaking. It's not that compromise is bad. It's that constant compromise turns into something darker. It turns into resentment. I remember walking through the front door one evening, after a long day at work. The house should have been my refuge, my escape, but instead, it felt like a pressure chamber. Shoes by the door, mail piled up, her sigh from the kitchen before I even spoke, and instantly, my chest tightened. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The silence already carried the weight of tomorrow's argument. That's when I realized, this wasn't peace, it was prison. And yet, society tells us we're selfish if we don't live together. That independence means we're avoiding intimacy. That solitude is proof of failure. But let me tell you something. Independence is not failure. Independence is survival, especially in a culture like ours. Because here in America, living together doesn't just mean sharing space. It can mean sharing liability. You see, most men don't know this, but in many states, if you live with someone long enough, the government may treat it as common law marriage. Think about that. You never walked down the aisle, you never signed a marriage license, and yet one day you may find yourself in court defending assets you built long before she moved in. I've seen men blindsided by this. Men who thought they were just cohabiting, men who thought independence meant they were safe. But the law didn't care. And when the relationship ended, they didn't just lose love. They lost homes. They lost savings. They lost years of their life to a system that never asked their permission. So tell me, is living together really proof of love? Or is it a gamble stacked against you? I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I'm simply awake, and I want you to be awake too. Because here's the deeper truth. Love does not demand you surrender your peace. Love does not demand you surrender your freedom. But cohabitation, more often than not, does. And that's why so many men past 40, past 50, look around at their lives and whisper, never again. It's not because they don't want connection. It's because they finally understand the hidden costs. The cost of walking on eggshells, the cost of losing themselves, the cost of watching their peace dissolve into daily conflict. And those costs are heavier than any loneliness could ever be. I once sat with a friend, divorced at 55. He told me, you know what I miss the least? Not the intimacy, not the vacations. I miss the silence. The silence I could never have while we lived under the same roof. That hit me harder than any statistic ever could. Because the truth is simple. A man can recover from heartbreak, but recovering from years without peace? That's a wound that never fully closes. So when people ask, why do older men resist living with someone again? The answer isn't fear. It isn't bitterness. It's wisdom. They've seen the cage. They've paid the price. And they know. Freedom is worth more than companionship that feels like prison. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Even if you ignore the law, even if you survive the resentment, even if you try to make peace with constant compromise, there's still another cost. It's the cost of desire. And once that's gone, no amount of therapy or weekend trips can bring it back. Because passion does not thrive in captivity. It thrives in distance, in longing, in space. And when you live together without breathing room, you don't just lose desire. You lose yourself. That is why, for me, independence isn't just better. It's necessary. Not because I hate relationships, but because I value peace more than partnership that feels like punishment. They told us marriage was about equality, that a modern relationship works best when everything is 50-50. Bills, decisions, responsibilities, leadership. Sounds good on paper, but in real life, two captains on the same ship don't make the journey smoother. They make it chaotic. I've seen it. I've lived it. Every choice became a debate. Every plan became a battle of wills. and every conversation felt less like love and more like a negotiation. Here's the myth. They call it equality, but too often it's just confusion. Because when no one leads, when no one takes responsibility, the relationship drifts into resentment. Picture it. Two drivers fighting over the same wheel. No one wants to let go. No one wants to trust. And the car, instead of moving forward, veers dangerously off the road. That's what living together can feel like. A constant tug of war where peace is the first casualty. And the longer it lasts, the uglier it gets. Because resentment has a cousin, and his name is disgust. Disgust doesn't shout. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't even argue. Disgust is quieter. It's the sigh when you walk into the room, the eye roll when you speak, the way she pulls away when you reach for her hand. It's not loud, but it's lethal. Once disgust sets in, desire doesn't just fade, it vanishes. And with it, the very thing that made you believe living together was worth it. I'll never forget the moment it hit me. I came home late. She was sitting at the table, wine glass half empty. I said, "Hey." She didn't answer, didn't even look up. And right there, in that silence, I knew we weren't lovers anymore. We weren't even friends. We were just two strangers sharing the same prison. That's the climax no one warns you about. Not the fights, not the bills, not the endless chores, but the disgust. Because when disgust arrives, the countdown to the end has already begun. So what's the resolution? Do men just give up? Do we stay alone forever? No. The truth is more nuanced than that. Independence doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean bitterness. It doesn't mean swearing off love forever. Independence means you finally value your peace more than your pride. It means you stop sacrificing yourself just to fit an outdated script. It means you understand that love without freedom isn't love. It's captivity. Some couples thrive because they don't merge everything. They live apart. They keep their homes. They keep their routines. And they come together because they want to, not because they have to. That space, that breathing room, is what keeps the spark alive. I know this goes against what most people believe, but look at the numbers. Look at the divorce rates. Look at the countless men who whisper, "Never again." They're not heartless. They're not cold. They're not bitter. They're careful. They've paid the price once, and they refuse to pay it again. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe after all the noise, all the heartbreak, all the years of trying to fit into an arrangement that suffocates, the greatest wisdom is this: peace is priceless. Freedom is sacred, and independence is not the absence of love. It's the condition that makes real love possible. So if you ask me today, is independence really better than living together? Here's my answer. Independence isn't better. It's safer. It's wiser. It's necessary. Because when a man learns to protect his peace, when he values freedom over constant compromise, he doesn't shut the door on love. He simply raises the standard. Love must walk through the front door of peace, or it doesn't enter at all. And if that means living alone, so be it. Because at the end of the day, solitude doesn't destroy a man. It rebuilds him. And the men who understand this, the ones who've walked through divorce courts, who've endured years of silent resentment, who've survived the cage of cohabitation, they are the ones who finally realize independence isn't loneliness, it's clarity. And clarity is the one thing no one can take from you. So maybe you don't need to ask, how do I get my wife to want me again? Oh, maybe the better question is, how do I want myself enough to protect my peace first? That, my friend, is the real truth no one tells you. If you've ever felt this when living together is filled with silence and exhaustion, and you finally realize that peace is the most valuable thing, leave a comment. I choose peace, not chaos. Because when we say this out loud, we are no longer alone. You're not the only one who chooses independence over losing yourself.